Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Grain Market Blast. We are back. I did sort of survived Vegas. It is 6th of October. It is Thursday all day. You join myself and the gorgeous, the glamorous, the goddess of grain herself, Angie Setzer, where Angie will be providing us with a rapid roundup of the latest pricing flows and market moving news in agricultural markets. But before we crack on, I'll get the legals out of the way. Nothing discussed in this Spaces session, podcast session, constitute trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ, myself, Ryan Paisey, or indeed the glamorous Angie Setzer. Angie, how are you, my love? Have you missed
Uh,
me?
I did. New phone. Who dis? I have no idea how to even do this anymore.
I was struggling. I'll give you a clue.
And so I'm like, where do I even start? Do I just do we do a refresher of the week? Because I mean, it's not like there's much for us to talk about. Not really anything has happened, just a pure escalation of the trade war.
Yeah,
And
so I was thinking that. It's like, so did much happen whilst I was away? It was like
right? That's right. Did I miss much? I don't feel like I did. But yeah, I mean, you did, but you didn't. Price-wise, I would bet you if we were to look back at the chart and see where was grain trading when Ryan left to go to Vegas, we were probably at the same price because
Yeah.
we have not gone anywhere. The one thing I will, what we can kind of go over or where we are now,
Yeah.
I guess, or what we're watching is basically and like I said, I'm kind of struggling. Like, how do you organize and get back on like a regular sort of like where have we been? But harvest is pretty much wrapped up for soybeans. Most of the country, we saw a really rapid record harvest pace. And my eye twitches now when I see people say, "Oh, we're probably around 50% harvested." Like, not ragging on anyone, but if they're saying we're 50% harvested in soybeans, then I'm doubting they're actually talking to farmers. The majority of the customers that I have that had soybeans planted are done, have been done for upward of a week now. And what we've seen while you were on vacation, was a really big sign in the cash market that, the crop at the very least was not as big as expected. The crop is either not as big as expected or demand on the front end is larger than anticipated. We basically got to the end of the week a week ago or the start of last week and quickly saw basis firm. We saw spreads firm. You saw the Nov Jan go from 21 cents to 14 cents at one point. It's currently it's relaxed a bit because you saw basis also firm 30 cents in some places. So, for an elevator, if you were an elevator that had ownership bought at a 70, 80 under or whatever, and you did it because the local elevator or the processor was posted 50 under, then all of a sudden the processor goes to 15 under and your spread comes in a nickel. You know what I mean? You can turn and burn some beans a lot quicker. And I think that's what we saw. So I think you've seen the commercial kind of work some beans into the pipeline. But from an overall standpoint, as we come to the end of soybean harvest here, the biggest thing I would say is that, the crop is probably much smaller than anticipated. If we have a yield in line with a year ago, which our finish was worse than last year, and based on the fact that much of the moisture that beans were ran at was 3% below what was considered naturally dry. So, that's a 3% drag on bushels that you get because that's water weight that you're given that went into the sky. And so you could easily argue right now that soybean production's 200 to 250 million bushels below the current USDA estimate. Now,
So,
we have
question for you,
go ahead. Yeah.
if I may. So obviously at the moment we're kind of, because harvest is kind of just finishing up, or it depends on who you ask. It could be 50% done, but we're disagreeing with that one. But when do we find out what the final number was on this then?
Next September.
Oh, okay, so we've got a long time to wait then.
So we'll have a lot. I mean, we'll have a
God
lot of
damn it.
uh, back and forth. Like we'll get a yield number from the USDA. Another, if we get a November, if we ever get the government back open, if we have a November report, we will get an updated yield figure in that one, which will be nice. I mean, I'm almost gotten to the point. I remember when the government was shut down in 2013. I was just a young lass,
Of
and
course.
I was so bummed because we were without information. Now here I am, an old crotchety
No, no,
and,
lies,
I
lies.
I'm like, "Let's just not have any report until January at this rate, because at least then we get accurate data." But, yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna be January really until we know because that'll be based off from December stocks, and that'll be kind of a more official
Right.
estimate than anything else. But then they'll kind of play around with it. Like the January number is the final. I'm using air quotes, you can't see it. Final number, but then they can change it for up to two years later, and they
Right.
will. They have, and they'll tell you it's because we're wanting to, just make sure that we're perfecting all of our information that comes out. And I guess that, that is what it is. And so we'll see. But the one thing I would say, or I would caution everyone at this point, is the cash market is like physics, right? Cash grain, there are rules, there are things, that's the
It's
beauty part about
physical.
trading. Go ahead.
It's physics. It's physical.
It is. It is. It's a physical, yes. And so you have a pipeline, you have logistics, you have all of these things. And when you see basis firm, you see spreads firm, that is a sign that you're just not fulfilling nearby demand, whether it's bigger demand or smaller supply. I don't give a shit. We'll figure that out later. But that's what we're watching right now in soybeans. And that's part of why you're seeing the soybean market. A lot of people keep talking about, oh, the bottom's going to fall out. Oh, if we don't get China demand. Oh, but really when it comes down to it, the cash market is saying FAFO right now. You want to short this? That, basically what has been the lower end of the range on the risk that we could solve the trade issue, because that's the other thing that I'm watching is that basically China has stopped making purchases of new crop soybeans from Brazil. They're currently, according to our friend Eduardo, they're 5 million metric ton behind on purchases, versus a year ago. Now, that's not a substantial thing, and there's reasons for it. You know what I mean? Like we're talking 184 million bushels. Farmer selling in Brazil is a lot slower. It's about that much slower. The crusher is a little bit more aggressive. Meal sales in China are slow because they are working to cut back on their hog herd size. They want to cut 1 million sows out of their population and, some of these other things. So margins aren't the greatest. But, we keep talking like China's just going to completely say F you to us, come January 1 as well. And that's not necessarily the case.
No.
There is a lot of room for them to concede and make some concessions. And at this point, if the crop truly is a heck of a lot smaller than what we're talking about right now, there isn't much room for exports to actually go higher. And so the one thing I always kind of say to folks is like, for me, it's not as much the risk of, what everyone's anticipating to have happen in the market happening. It's more of what are we not? And obviously within reason, like I'm not out here like, well, what if, the rapture happens tomorrow and we suddenly have no demand? But what happens if China does come in and buy 20 million metric ton of beans? Like we don't really have room at this point. So we'll continue to watch that. Obviously the trade war itself is I don't know what mode we're in. Was that Trump tweet? Was that a real? I saw a picture last night with the Trump with the Winnie the Pooh. Was that real?
I've not seen that one. I'm hoping
You have
it
not?
wasn't
Okay.
based on what you
I'll have
said.
to look and see. I don't think it was. Like, I woke up this morning and I'm like, are you kidding? Like, some people, anyway, it's probably AI. Who knows? I always assume anything I see anymore is AI, even in my
Same,
real
same.
life.
It's becoming a massive
They are.
problem, I'll be honest.
But, like I said, I mean, at this point, you saw China. I think China, kind of came in. They came back from vacation. And I said this to a group of my friends last week. I'm like, they came back from vacation and chose economic violence. They were just
Yeah.
basically like, F it, we're flipping the table. Let's get this situation. We're either going to blow it up or we're going to resolve it. And basically, that's where the White House is at right now as well.
Yeah.
Like, we're either going to blow this up entirely or we're going to resolve it. And guess what? We're about 3 weeks away from knowing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
super fun times. Happy yeehaw, giddy up. Beyond that, I'm trying to figure out what the heck. Sorry, something just went by and they honked on the way by, so that's cool. And now my
I
dogs are
wondered
all
what that
barking.
was I heard. And obviously then the dogs kicked off.
Yeah, that's what they heard. They're like, what? But other than that, we're, obviously we don't have any sort of info from the USDA. We don't know what export sales look like. We're kind of going off from trader estimates at this point.
Right.
The cash market is saying something's going on. And I keep going back to that and I apologize, but like we saw December corn pop yesterday. We're seeing it pop again today versus the July board. And if you remember, I've said that a couple different times. Like, we've really got to be watching that. When I first started saying it, it was at 37 cents. And I was like, if it comes in and if it breaks that 30-cent mark, it's going to have my attention. We're at 29 cents today in harvest.
Ish.
So you're removing carry from the market. There's all kinds of things that are going on. The U.S. is the cheapest provider of grain in the world right now. We're seeing a continuation of strong wheat sales, and so I'm not trying to, Pollyanna optimism our way through this thing, but I think, as we work our way into harvest, we're kind of discovering that these really, really lofty crop estimates. Remember the carpet and the curtains analogy?
Yes, I do. How could I forget?
Unfortunately, they did not match. Like we're kind of in a little bit of a once everything. Maybe it's like the crying game over here, I guess, at this point. In some places, but we went off the rails big time. Welcome back. But we'll just kind of continue to watch that. The biggest thing, though, I'm paying attention to is the U.S. is going to see a continuation of super strong demand. Maybe not for soybeans from China at this point, but we also are still seeing the rest of the world come in and buy in a big way. Mexico demand is kind of this sort of secret, sort of sleeper thing that we have going on. Mexico has almost 12 million metric ton of soybean crush capacity, and they typically only use around 60% of it. They're obviously feeding cattle for longer now because we're not exporting our feeders. We've talked about that with corn. You know what? Now I'm hearing more and more of a lot of beans working their way down there that you may not typically see. Egypt is also really ramping up their imports, and you've got a handful of other places that are trying to really offset.
Right.
Well, and the basis is good, so why the heck not? They're making money on it. But yeah, so we'll see. Market wise here today, we're a half hour in. Beans are up a nickel. We've tried to trade above 10.12 a couple different times. It'd be good to see if we could break out above 10.15. But yeah, it'd be cool. We'd probably work our way back towards 10.30 because our range has been so tight lately. But corn's back up, up 3 right now. December corn is 419-ish. That's back up above, what was resistance here at that 418 or so. 420 seems to be the happy place for corn. I get that. And so that's where we're sitting.
I see what you did there.
I think on that note, we're done.
Yeah. On that note, Angie, well, wonderful talking to you again. I have missed you considerably. You know this.
Me too.
Listeners, thank you so
Not
much
me.
for bearing with me on the break. It was all down to me. Unfortunately, I apologize profusely. But we're back, and whatever you're doing, stay safe, keep it tight, and we'll see you all tomorrow for the final one of the week. And then it's the weekend.
Woohoo! Have a good one, guys.
See you later.